Hey, family. One thing we all know for sure is that no one can accomplish a dream on their own. Everything in this life that we set out to accomplish requires support from friends, family, partners, mentors. Here at the Obsidian Theater Festival, we take this to heart. Over 200 authors, playwrights, composers submitted their work for our inaugural season, and while we could not accept all of them, a couple pieces definitely jumped out to us. One of those pieces, Dear Little, by Morgan Heyward, we recognized immediately to be a fantastic piece of theater. In this piece, we saw the beauty of the world that she created and the characters that she developed. And we also recognized that as a new piece, there was still some room for growth. And so our social artistic director, Alexis Sims, took it upon herself to take a hands-on approach. Over the course of a few weeks, she and Morgan spent hours on the phone, on Zoom, on Google Hangouts, working on this piece, giving Morgan an opportunity to work through character development, to tackle the story arc and the form. Here now is an interview between Morgan and myself where we get a chance to talk about the importance of the work that she and Alexis put in to making Dear Little a phenomenal piece of theater, and also a brief conversation with Alexis so we can understand exactly what that does for us as artists when we feed into each other. Enjoy. So, hi, Morgan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. I got to admit, I'm a little tired, but
I
I'm,
bet.
it's a good tired.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing what you love, right? Just so much of it.
First of all, I got to tell you, Alexis does not get impressed easily. Um, and she has been raving about you for
Oh,
weeks.
that's so sweet.
No, seriously, man. Like we had a lot of plays that
Mm,
got submitted. I think it was over like 200 individual
wow.
playwrights and that submitted work, right?
Hmm.
And we read them all blind because we knew that we were going to know people.
Right.
And it was going to be just easier if we just disassociated and just read the work.
Hmm.
And when she read your piece, she called me and she goes, "Hey, have you read this piece yet?" And I said, "No, not yet. It's on my list. I'll get to it." She's like, "Well, we have to do it." And I was like, "Well, I haven't read it yet." So like, give me a minute to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
Um, so is it okay if, could you just tell me a little bit about you and what it was that made you want to write this piece in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess like a bigger picture as an artist, I've always known that I wanted to do theater. But I was like one of those kids that tried everything. So I didn't really like buckle down, I guess, per se, until late in high school. And then even then I was like, I'm gonna be an actress. That's it. Like I want to be an actress. And I've always been a good writer, but like my thing in my mind, I was like, I'm going to be an actress. So then I got to college and I went to Russell Sage and Troy. I had done an internship with them my senior year in high school, and they knew me already. So they kind of threw a ton of money at me, and I was like, I can't really say no. So let me go to Sage. And at that point, I had kind of already experienced some of the stuff that I write about in the play. But again, they gave me money that nobody else had really given me. So I was like, I'm just going to push through. When I was there, I didn't get a ton of opportunities to be on stage because the seasons that they were picking were not really seasons with character or shows with characters in them that I could be cast in. And I was the only Black girl in my year in the department. Prior to me, there was one Black girl in the department for her year, and so on and so forth. So that was kind of the trend. So they never really had to wiggle or move or change anything because they pretty much were getting the same cast of people every year. So I went through my 4 years. I felt extremely unfulfilled by the end of them. The end of my junior year, I was pretty miserable. Actually, before that, I was ready to leave. But again, the school has a program where you can study abroad. So my mom was like, just do that, like focus on that. You won't even be at Sage next year. And just like use that to your advantage. When else are you going to be able to go to London? So end of my junior year, I'm like miserable. A mentor of mine had just produced a show that she wrote and developed. So I went to her and I was like, I'm miserable. I feel like I need to put all of these feelings into something. Like, where do I start to create a show? And she talked through some of the things that I had experienced at Sage as far as microaggressions, discrimination, racism with me. And we kind of made this idea like, I'm going to write a show, or I'm going to write something about what happened at Sage. Then I go to London, I'm there, I kind of start the writing process there, but it's still kind of, this is my first time away. This is my first time like not in the thick of it. So it was really more of a time for me to reflect on what my experience had been. And then I get back and I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a show that's like exactly what people did to me or what I experienced. So we have every year seniors are asked to do like a capstone type of thing. And most times they just do like a cabaret. They'll sing like 6 songs that they did throughout their 4 years or whatever. I can't sing. So I was like, how can I leave something behind that's positive and not feel like I'm leaving Sage just upset and miserable? So that's where the idea of Dear Little comes in. We have mentees that we call our littles, and she is of Latinx background, and she was kind of having a similar experience as me, and she was struggling with some of the same things I was struggling with. So I said to myself, like, how can I leave something behind for her while also finding some solace for myself? And that's when I set out to start writing these letters, which then turned into a show. And I performed it at school in 2017. And the process of performing it, we have to like go to our advisors, who are also our professors, about whatever our senior show is. So of course everybody was kind of like, oh my God, this happened to you. Like, because until this point I hadn't said anything really to anybody. It was like easier to get along, like go along to get along type of thing, or it felt like it in the moment. Mm-hmm. So everyone was like, oh my goodness, like what can we do? And Title IX got involved, and like the dean and the school's president, everybody got involved. And then I do the show, and it was like, all of a sudden nobody could help me with anything anymore. Yeah. And granted, there was obviously there were a couple people that were still very supportive. Mm-hmm. But en masse, like everyone was like, oh, that was beautiful. Thank you for being so bold and so raw and so vulnerable, but you're graduating, so we can't really do anything. Yeah. So whatever, it was like an experience for me to vent and kind of like heal. And I was done. And everybody was like, you need to do it. You need to tour it. And I was just like, no. So when I graduated, I started my theater company, Illuminate Theater, which was just to tell more stories like that and feature actors of color in the capital region where I'm from in Albany. So I did that. And then come now to the pandemic, the school actually reached out to me to perform Dear Little as a part of their virtual season. And that's why I say there were a couple people that did get it and that really do support me. And they were the people that brought me back. So that's what brought me back to it. Yeah. And I just performed it I performed it in August to premiere in October. And it kind of took on a new life. We had a full set this time. When I first did it, it was very like bare bones. So we had a full set this time. And I did the show, and everybody was like, are you going to give it to other people? And I was like, y'all stay making me want to stay with this show. Like, I've been trying to drop it for years. Yeah. And everyone's like, no, you have to have other actors do it, da, da, da. So that's kind of what brought me to Obsidian. I saw that you guys were doing a festival, and I was like, everyone keeps telling me to give this to other people. Like, let me just apply. And Ghostlight seemed really dope. So I applied, and now I'm here.
And now you're here. That's awesome, man.
Kind of like the journey, yeah.
So this is the first time you will have seen anybody else do it. Is that accurate? Because you've done it yourself up until now?
I've only ever watched myself, yeah.
Wow. Is that weird for you? Are you nervous about that?
Well, watching the cast the other night was even just watching a reading was like so grounding, and it was surreal, but it was so beautiful to see other people perform it, but also like get it and connect with it. And that was like why my interactions with Alexis have been so important to me, because obviously when you guys emailed me, I was like so excited, but I also was like, I'm the only one that's directed this and acted in it. Like a friend of mine helped me direct the newer version, but it was still somebody I knew and I was still like fully involved in it. So I was kind of nervous. I'm like, does it make sense? Like, is another director gonna get it? And I expressed that to Alexis. I was like, I just want to make sure it's really clear and concise for the actresses and also for the director. And so that's when we kind of started working through it, and she was just really great with like pulling my true voice out of it, because I think that there was still a bit of a mask there. Like when you write, it was about the people that I was performing it for when I did it in college, so there was still a little bit of like holding back and trying to make it palatable. So Alexis kind of pulled all of that off and made me feel like my voice was really being heard. So now I feel a lot more confident about giving it to other people, because I feel confident that my message is really gonna come forth. So I'm excited. I'm like really excited to see it on its feet.
That's really amazing. When we were thinking about the shows and how we were going to put everything together, we wanted to make sure we had a really well-rounded season. And so we thought about, what stories are we telling? Whose voices are we uplifting? Do we have diversity in authors and like the types of work that they're putting out there? And the initial ask for you was that, look, we love this piece. It's just a little long for what we're trying to do. Like, what's the running time? Like, can we tighten this up at all? And I just remember, if I'm remembering correctly, you and I had emailed first, and then Alexis jumped on the thread. And the moment she jumped on the thread, she was like, I love this, I'm gonna do it. And as you know, by now, even though it says producing artistic director next to my name, when she wants to do something, there's no, I just say, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And that happens, right? So what, can you talk about that process? Can you talk about, because I dare say it would have been really different if you and I had worked on it, right? Than then what happened with you and her.
Yeah.
So what was that process like? Like, how did you guys start tackling this piece?
So when we originally sat down, I expressed what I just said, that I just wanted to make sure that it was very clear. And then we basically had 2 sessions. So the first session, we sat down for a long time, like 4 hours, and we went through the entire play. And Alexis kind of conveyed to me like where things were a little bit unclear, or not even, like more so the thing that really helped me was that she asked me questions. She went through with me and she said, like, who is this about? Is it about big or is it about little? Why is it about little? What do you want little to do? Why are we, like, what are we trying to get from her? And then we also, the first time, really looked at the structure, because originally, all the way back in 2017, there was no little. She came in at the very, very, very end for like 2 lines or 3 lines. And it was my real little, who was not an actress. And I did the rest of the play myself. Then fast forward to this past October, we added in Little as like an omnipresent character who was just on stage. But again, she had no lines. It was more just supposed to be like a metaphor for the fact that there's always somebody watching, whether it be like somebody younger than you watching, whether it be a younger sibling or a niece or a nephew or a cousin or whomever. There's always somebody looking up to you, even when you don't know it. So then when Alexis and I sat down, we really looked into that idea of like, well, can Little be bigger? Where can Little be bigger? Where can Little have more lines? How can this be more actively her story as well? Because that was the goal in the first place, was to give my Little something that would encourage her and empower her. So we really just, the first time we really just went through and kind of looked at where things could be tweaked. And then I left and I went and changed like a lot, like probably way too much. And then we came back and Alexis gently was like, I don't know if you got what I meant, but let's look at it again. And she was really great. And she literally went like line by line by line. And we basically combined the first draft and the second draft. So in the second draft, I really got specific about the outline and about like the flow. In the original draft, I just wrote it as it came to me.
Stream of consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. It was really like, for all intents and purposes, it was one long diary entry. And then after our first meeting, I went back and I was like, okay, well, when did these things happen? Let's outline it when they happen in real life. And then I looked at it again. I'm like, okay, well, this happened first in real life, but it's more interesting if this other thing happens first. And Alexis really helped me with being comfortable in doing that, because she was like, you can take it out of your reality and just let it be whatever it needs to be for the play. So that was really interesting too.
Like, you know what I mean? Because I write and Alexis writes, and when you write a piece that is autobiographical, it can be really difficult sometimes to separate your story from the play. You know what I mean? Was that a difficult process?
Yeah, it was. It was really hard, and it was hard to it was hard to release it. And I think that's why like our second session was so important, because the second draft that I did after our first session was like taking that and almost going too far. Like I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm gonna be free with it. And then let me add all this stuff that like I didn't really need to add. So it was cool to come back the second time and really just look at what was already there and see like how we could take the mask off and see like how I could really distill it down to take off all the fluff and feathers and extra things that I felt like I had to include to like engage people and just make it really raw. And the second session was hard for both of us. Like there was tears, there was, just because the story is heavy, right? So like for me visiting it, especially the scene about going to the frat house and having an experience that wasn't positive, like the whole play is my real life. So to really sit down the way we did the second time, and like it was like kind of like taking away any defense mechanisms that I had written in, because again, like I performed this the first time and the second time, so there was things written in to almost like protect me from going back there. And Alexis like wouldn't let me hide from any of that stuff, so we really like pulled that stuff away, which was beautiful, but it was also really hard. But I'm also really glad we did it, because it makes it even more of a raw, it's more my story now.
You know, so like for me, so I didn't know that, first of all, right? Like she did a really good job. I would check in and I would say, hey, how's it going with Morgan? And she's like, it's great. It's going really well. We sat down, we had a great conversation. Fine. And so I didn't know like how much of it was autobiographical for you.
Yeah.
Until like right now, really. So thank you, I guess, for sharing that and for like having the courage to write it down in the first place, and performing it, and then for being willing to engage in that process and give it to us, and trust us with it, because that's not easy. And then considering the autobiographical nature, I imagine that was probably even harder, you know?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I feel like art can do a lot of things, but one of the things it's really great for is showing us the type of world we want to have, and like the type of world we want to create, and in that it can also show us the type of world we currently live in, you know. When people watch your piece, when people sit down and experience your piece, are there things that you really want them to come away with? Are there things that you really want them to realize and think through?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I feel like I always look at it from my perspective, but
Hmm.
obviously, like most Black women are going to get similar to what I'm getting from it. So I've been trying to think of like, what do I want people who maybe don't get it to get, if
Hmm.
that makes sense?
Absolutely.
So I've been reflecting on this a lot, and there's several things like, and me and Alex and Bree talked about this the other day. There's a lot in there that is relatable to anyone, as far as like
Hmm.
not feeling like you have to conform to whatever society wants you to be, speaking your truth. Like there's a lot of lessons in there that are relatable to anybody regardless. But one thing I think about is how often um people, I'm mixed race. My mom is white and my dad is Black. And so my experience has always been like people trying to put me in one place or another, and trying to put me in a box, and that's what the play is about. And I think that that's a really important lesson to take away from this, is to not allow yourself to be put in a box, but also not try to put anyone else in a box.
Sure.
And like we as a society are obsessed with race, and we want to be able to like tie it up in this pretty little package and be like, if you're Black you can only do da 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 da, if you're white you can only do da 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 da, and you're supposed to feel this way about each other. And like that's not right, and it's not human. And like we as Black people are not monoliths, and we as a society are not a monolith. So I think that the biggest lesson that I could say to like take away from this is like to expand your perspective and your perception of what you think people are, what you think life is, and what you think society is, because otherwise I think that it's very easy to be consumed. And one thing that I didn't realize when I first wrote this play was that I had been so consumed by race and by other people's expectation of me because of my race. And I think that my experience could have been extremely different if I wasn't.
You know, I understand that. It's interesting because like I'm a cishet Black male in my late 30s,
Mhm.
and I read that piece, but so much of it was identifiable to me.
Mhm.
Um, and like I went to a PWI and like had similar experiences and finding myself at many moments feeling like I was caught in the middle.
Mhm.
And like I didn't know like where I felt, and like, forcing myself to try to change and shift and bend so one group of people could like me, or so that I could be accepted by another group of people, and that extending, you know, through middle school, through high school, into college, and
Mhm.
coloring so much of how I behaved and
Yeah.
how I chose to like interact, you know what I mean, and like who I chose to hang out with. And it was just really striking to me how you managed to tell a story that was so relatable to anyone, I think.
Mhm.
And that really spoke volumes. Do you mind if we bring Alexis in and
Yeah, we
all
can.
talk for a second? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see what she's doing.
I'm right here. I've been here the whole time.
Oh, see,
Naturally.
I would have said some other. If I know you were here, okay.
That's, you never know who's listening.
Mm. So hey, so since you've been here, so you and I never really had like talked in detail about your stuff with Morgan. You said you're doing it. You said it was going really well. I trusted that I was going really well, and that was kind of that. Like looking back on this process, what was it like for you, like reading this piece the first time and working through those two sessions and then seeing, you know, the shape it's in now?
I mean, I was like so emotional at the first read because it just it came to life in a way that it was like it felt like the first time, right, Morgan? Like I
Mhm.
felt like you had that same feeling.
Yeah.
Like when I first read the piece, I was like, I want to work on this piece with her. I think
Yep.
you remember that, John. I was like, this is great, but I want to work on it with her.
Mhm.
And it's interesting the ways that we hide in plain sight. And what I mean by that is the way that you initially wrote it, Morgan, like you were telling a lot. So it seemed like we were getting a lot, but really you were hiding because you were telling what happened as opposed to how you felt in each moment.
Yeah.
And really taking the mask off in that way. And the second session was like definitely interesting because we worked like 4 hours each time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm gonna order Chinese food. She was like, yeah, me too. Just because even when I, like Morgan was saying, like would ask certain things, then when she came back in the second draft, she was still avoiding.
Mm-hmm.
She was, but there were also parts where you got really creative, like the overlaying stuff when the 3 people are speaking at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was like, Morgan, it doesn't have to be like exactly like your life. and even just like putting the focus on Lil and like, what is it that because there were also these lessons that were like kind of sprinkled throughout. But the form wasn't really established. And so it was like, I don't know if I'm answering the question that you asked, but I just felt like there was more truth to get to. And that if Morgan could have a form, so now the form is very clear, like every section pretty much starts the same, right? With a lesson. Mm-hmm. Then it would give her the freedom to play, and also deciding, like Morgan decided, I don't even know how, you got to this, but it was like, is who's in the present and who's acting out the past. Mm-hmm. And if someone is acting out the past, why are they doing that? Like, how is the other participating? Do you want to talk about that, Morgan?
Yeah. So, I mean, that journey kind of started with the first draft because originally it was just always me. So it was me dipping in and out of present and past. And so that obviously got a little more complicated when you add a second person in. But even in the second performance of it, it still was only so complicated because we just had her on stage. Like, she was essentially a prop. So then when I started to reassign text, that's where I really had to be very clear and concise about how that time shift happens and where it happens. So I was really just I really looked at the text and like who needed to have what when in order to serve the time in the character's life that I was trying to show or create. And it was also interesting with the stage direction because the first draft had like so much stage directions because again, like I was like, well, before when I did this, I just told myself what to do, or I told my director what I wanted it to look like and they told me what to do. So I never had to like have it written out so somebody else would understand it. So getting really clear with the stage directions also, I think, helped to show like the time periods, but I really wanted it to be like lesson example, or like lesson example, wrap up of why I just showed you that example, and then the next lesson. So that's where like the time, the like going back in time came up.
And also I remember you had said you really wanted the flashbacks to be raw.
Yeah.
And to be real for Little.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that's great. But then you can't tell us about it. You have to like show us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have to like let us in to how you really felt. Mm-hmm. And I was even thinking about in the second draft, in our second time, you were like, I'm just like, I feel like the poetry's gone and like the language is gone. And so just talking about kind of how not even Maya Angelou's poetry, which is like a huge part of the piece, that book, but like your poetry, like your heightened language, and that you were like a dream, not a dream feel, but the heightened reality of it, which, I mean, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about, but I just feel like in structuring it, the way that you ended up structuring it, and having Big act out these things and have like while Lil is reading it. So like Lil is seeing it happen in real time as opposed to just reading the letter.
Yeah.
Like that creates a heightened reality also.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sorry, like, and I'm just going back to that waterfall cascading moment where you started layering in not only the voices of the guy from the frat house, but also then all the other voices that were like kind of doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And how powerful it is to have like Lil saying some of those things.
Yeah.
And seeing that interplay. But all of that is very heightened,
Mm-hmm.
kind of non-realistic, or those are heightened non-realistic mechanisms. So I don't know if do you want to talk at all about why that was important to you, that was there, and like the role of the poetry in your own writing and the elevation of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When the poetry comes in, again, like this has always been just kind of like, I mean, it always was my way of processing. Like this play at the root of it was like my way of processing. So the first iterations were very just raw, and in that, or not raw, but raw, if that makes sense. Like it was just an outpouring of everything that had happened. And a part of that has always been poetry since I was like very small. And I talk about my grandmother's library. And my first introduction to poetry was Maya Angelou. So that kind of like heightened, elevated, prettier language was a way for me to save myself in real life, but also in the writing. Like to an extent, as much as I love it, I think that some of that, the poetry of it is my way of like processing, but protecting myself, like, and also like making it make sense. Like having the two poems at the beginning and the end were my way of like figuring it out without really figuring it out, if that makes sense. Like even when I wrote the second bird poem, it was like my way of saying, okay, this is what happens after all of the trauma, but I was still saying it in a pretty way that was like that I could process and that I could digest. But I think that it also takes the viewer to a place where things make sense. I don't know, like.
Yeah. I also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering, since we're talking technically for a second, right, about mechanism and form, how much of that were you thinking about the first time? Like, I know that a lot of it was autobiographical, and were you thinking, I'm going to write this piece stylistically in a way that models X, Y, and Z? Or was it more organic in that way? And then that type of conversation around structure was something that you got to later?
Yeah, I think it was both. Like I knew I wanted to write poetically because I started writing poetry. So I've always had a very natural ability to just, everything sounds flowery, I guess. Like even papers in school, they'd be like, you don't need all that. And I'd be like, but why? But yeah, so that just kind of came naturally. And then we found more of a structure in this last iteration that I did. The structure came out more. And the reason for the second bird poem was because in the 3 years that I hadn't touched the piece, I had gone through a lot of therapy, and a lot of that was somatic therapy, and it was extremely physical. Yeah. So that brought me back to the idea of the bird, and like the bird being in the cage, and like what feeling constricted and like repressed does to your body. And so then the second bird poem was like me trying to figure out what it does. And like when you are able to like shed all of the trauma and like the things that have been keeping you away from yourself for so long, then who do you become? So that's where the bird poem came from, because I didn't feel like just saying that really expressed like the heightened level of how I felt like coming out of therapy and then coming back to this play. Like really felt like otherworldly and like out of body almost. So that's where like that heightened language came into play.
So I'm really glad that you said that, Morgan, because I was about to ask you. I'm so glad that John went first. I feel like so before we started working on the play, I was like, listen, Morgan, I'm just very real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was. But I'm not gonna sugarcoat anything.
Yeah, I was like, I'm gonna keep it 100. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If it's okay with you, I just want to let you know this is how I communicate, because I think it's really gonna best serve the piece. Mm-hmm. And I was suggesting a lot of cutting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, cut this, this doesn't make sense here.
And Morgan does that to me all the time.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, John also likes to write a lot of words when it could be written, simpler. Mm-hmm. And especially
beautiful that way. Sorry.
Yes, it is. It is. And it can also be said simply. So especially since we were trying to get the piece down a little bit into a certain like time frame, right? It was like, how do we trim? How do we simplify certain language, but still keep the intention and the voice the same? And so I'm kind of curious, like, for me, it feels like the piece is much clearer and actually more beautiful and more impactful because it is more concise. Mm-hmm. And you're really only saying the things that you need to say, as opposed to like the language was another way of protecting self, kind of like what you're saying, but mm-hmm. Just like the insidiousness of our defense mechanisms and our protections. Yeah. But I'm curious, like, what that process was like for you, because if what I'm saying is true in a way, then in me being like, cut, no, take that out, remove this, like, what are you really saying, is almost like forcing you to shed a skin. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, like, what that was like for you and how you felt going through it. And then like how you feel coming out on the other side of it. Cause that second day we met, we had some moments.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think it was hard, especially like after the first meeting. I still was like trying to hang on to things. But I think even like in the second meeting, it started to get easier. Like towards the end of the play, I just started to be like, and we gonna cut this and we gonna cut this. And like, I don't need this. And I realized too, like when I was reading it again, that there was a lot of repetition. Like I developed this habit of like, well, if I say it 3 times, then people are really going to know that I mean it. So there was a lot of like the same stuff. And so that got easier to cut as I noticed that, but it was definitely a really, exhausting process. Like afterwards, I lived with my family and I was like, I'm gonna just need y'all to not talk to me for a second. Like I need to take a shower and like decompress. And it was like exhausting in the best way. And I feel like that's what's beautiful about this piece. And Alexis kind of like touched on this when we did the read through, and just mentioned like when you come to this piece, like you have to bring your full self, because that's what it's made me do, even in writing it. And like having now this will be the second time I've come back to it since the first, and each time I have to get realer and realer and realer. And even like the second time when I performed it for the second time, my director gave me the same notes about my acting that Alexis gave me about my writing. So each time I get closer and closer, like each time more comes off, more of the mask comes off. So that's been a lot, but also really freeing. And I'm really grateful for that process, and like grateful that I've been able to meet people who support me and like hold me in that process. So yeah.
There's that, I think it's a James Baldwin quote, but nothing can be changed until it's faced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of where we are as a country.
Mm-hmm.
The recognition of that. It's
Yeah.
why art is so important.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. It's hard to face the truth. The truth is not always sunshine and rainbows.
Mm-hmm.
Truth is hardly ever sunshine and
The
rainbows.
truth is hardly ever sunshine and rainbows. And so then we have a choice, kind of like what you're saying. You had a choice of, and it requires bravery. You were really brave in those meetings. And also even like, there were certain moments we had a back and forth. And you were like, no, I just really think. And I was like, Morgan, I hear you. Yes, I'm trying to tell you. Or I'd be like, okay, you're right. When you were like, I really want the poetry to still be there. I said, okay, great, put it. But then it can't be this. It has to be something else, right?
Right.
So Morgan, I'm curious because you took some time away from the piece, right? And then came back to it. And you just talked about like kind of somatic therapy. And I have a bunch of friends that have studied generative somatics and had tried to get me to do it. And my initial reaction was like, I ain't doing that. Why would I do that? I'm gonna be real. And it probably came from some weird like maleness thing that I should probably talk about and deal with at some point, if I'm being completely honest. And so then somebody else came to be like, you should really try generative somatics. And I was like, I'm not doing that. But why does everybody keep on telling me that I should do this thing? Maybe I should investigate it. And so I just, if you feel comfortable talking about the difference between the growth, I guess, that you went through over those 3 years between that, and people that aren't familiar with somatics, how that might have played into your ability to look at the piece differently later.
Yeah. So the journey with somatic therapy and like physical exploration started through theater. When I graduated college, I went directly into a training program at Shakespeare and Company. And their whole practice is based on Feldenkrais practice, which is it's not somatic therapy, but it's another physical practice that pushes you to release any trauma that like you're holding in your muscles and stuff. And I went into it like this, and I didn't even realize, but I just always like had tension everywhere. And by like the third week, we did this tremoring exercise, and I came out of it like sobbing and just fully exhausted, but my shoulders were released, and like all this pain that I just thought I had, I just was like, oh yeah, I'm in pain all the time. Cool, like whatever, started to release. And I was like, okay, what's this? And then about a year and a half later, I actually stumbled upon my current therapist because my therapist at the time was leaving. And it's crazy how the universe works, because I was like, no, Jackie, don't leave me. But then I came upon my new one, and she doesn't really do talking. Like she'll be like, how you doing? I'll be like, I'm good. And then she'll be like, bet, let's meditate, or like, let's do Reiki, or let's do yoga. And at the beginning I was like, what is this? What? But over time, it gave me the ability. Hold on, my dog is being a brat.
Okay.
Go, girl. But she's doing the most. Instead of just walking out the door, she had to walk under the crutches out the door, pushing them over. But anyways.
Wait, why are there crutches?
Oh, I fractured my knee in December.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm starting to walk now, so we're all good. But yeah, so the process of doing somatic therapy really awakened this new level of awareness that even now I'm still walking into. And I think I've been able to walk into it even more during this season of like being slow and not being in work and being able to really like sit and reflect. But it really brought me back into my body and made me aware of like how certain things make me feel. It's all about how do you feel when you're with a certain person? Where do you feel tension in your body when you're with that person? Do you feel tension? Like how's your breathing? Even when you read something, like how do emotions show up in your body? And that's been extremely useful for me as a person. And so then this summer, I had the pleasure of being a part of the Black Actors Institute at Stella Adler. And we worked with Michelle Shea, who does energy-centered acting, is a lot of her practice. And so then I read this book. It's all going to come full circle. So then I read this book, The Lucid Body, and that like really breaks it down. Like it goes through your chakras and like how different chakras present themselves in your body. And if you have like a sheltered heart chakra, then your body's gonna tend to fold inward more, and you're gonna represent in this way. So that training really helped me as an actor to now like start shedding these layers that I had been putting on as a person in the world to shield myself. And then as a result, I was also shielding my character. So I wasn't showing up fully. So then when I came to Dear Little for the second time, there was this inability to hide. Like now it was like, oh girl, you did all this work. And I was coming into the scenes and I'm feeling things that I'm like, wait, what's that? Like, oh, okay. So overall, I guess like short to sum it up is somatic therapy has just made me a lot more aware and brought me more into the present. So even working with Alexis in our second session, as we're going like from scene to scene, I was able to feel things that were under the surface. And that really helped me in pulling away text that didn't need to be there, because I could feel now like, wait, I wrote this because I was feeling this in that moment. When I wrote it, it was just like, fuck these people. Oh, I don't know if I can curse, sorry. But it was just like, I hate this school. Everything sucks, blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't really the feeling of it all, which now I'm able to get to.
Yeah. So I know it's starting to get late and I want to be respectful of your time, but I so appreciate you giving of yourself as an artist and as a writer, and like tonight with us. What is next for you? Like what's next for the piece? Do you feel like you're in a good place? Are you like, where are you going as an artist, do you think?
Well, I'm really excited about the piece because until now, I couldn't see myself really publishing it. But now that it's more clear and I feel like it's more concise, I feel really excited about publishing it and like being able to give it to the world. So I'm hoping to get it published. And as an artist, I mean, I'm just here. I'm just trying to be present. I'm just trying to like be available to the universe to give me my gifts. And, you know, I feel like I was just stressed for so long that I'm just trying to like continue my journey with somatic therapy. I want to learn more about energy-centered acting. And I'm just like in a place of learning right now. And I'm trying to have faith that like the more that I learn, the more opportunities will open up.
Yeah. Well, listen, I am just so appreciative of you and of your gifts, and I cannot wait. Obviously, we're recording this like before we've had a film, right? But I can't wait for it, man. I can't wait for us to see it and go through this process and be able to have this finished product. So I hope you're excited because we're really.
I am. And I keep telling everybody at home, like, I'm so happy that I'm working with you guys. And I feel like, again, to go back to the universe, like, I don't know how you guys feel as artists, but me, sometimes I'm like, what am I supposed to be like? I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing because I'm not auditioning every single day, all day. I'm not like sending in self-tapes every single day, all day. And I'm like, how are things gonna, like, what's gonna happen for me? Or I'm not doing enough or whatever. But I genuinely do believe that like you're supposed to be where you are and everything that is yours comes to you. And I say that because for years people were like, you need to do this play, you need to do this play. And I didn't. And if I didn't do it, if I hadn't waited to do it now when I did, I might not have ever fallen in line and connected with you guys. So I just think that everything aligns for a reason, because I really do feel like this is the place that I'm supposed to be watching it for the first time and like giving it over for the first time. So I'm really grateful for you guys and for all of this. So
thank you. We're grateful for you. So thank you, Morgan. Again, for all of you watching this interview, check out Dear Little as part of the Obsidian Theater Festival 2021. Thank you.
And good night.
Good night. It was great talking to you, Morgan.
Yeah, it was great talking to you guys too. You're not gonna edit that at all? So you're gonna see the dog, me getting the dog?
I haven't decided yet. Maybe not. Maybe we get the dog in the background. You know?